Awareness of violence against women living with HIV is very critical, because you can't speak about HIV without speaking of all the different forms of violence that women face.
The National Day of Action is important to me because, I was around in the beginning of this project, and it is important for the world to know that women living with HIV are highly impacted by intimate partner violence and just violence, period. I love women living with HIV, and I want nothing but the best for women. And I am a survivor of intimate partner violence while living with HIV.
I mean, we are no different from anyone else. But we get such a backlash just mentioning that we're living, with this. It's like most of it is not in your face. Most of it is when you leave a place, then everybody's whispering behind your back. So I would like to be a part of just bringing it out into the open where we're just like anybody else.
Well, first and foremost, we're people first. We're not a virus. And so having said that, so often violence occurs because of a lack of understanding, being educated around what HIV is, what kind of treatment is available, and how it impacts all of our relationships. And it still creates for an opportunity for violence to exist, whether it's physical, sexual, mental, emotional, financial. It affects every area of our life, including if you are anyone that has children, it affects the intergenerational trauma that's experienced and carried over.
I've done a couple of projects where I've gotten to be around other women living with HIV, and it was a little bit astounding that I think every woman sitting in the room had experienced some very long-lasting form of violence against them. A lot of it was, intimate partner violence or sexual assault type violence, but a lot of sort of discrimination or stigmatizing interaction with, healthcare providers or people that we might assume have better knowledge. All different backgrounds, all different races, all different sort of socioeconomic statuses. And every single one of us still had that particular thing in common.
I don't think it's fair that we be abused physical, mentally, any kind of way, okay? Especially living with HIV or AIDS, okay? That's a hard thing to do. You know what I mean? And it's a hard way to live it.
This day is important to me because I'm one of those women that was a part of the violence. It feels good to know that someone is out here acknowledging women and our needs in our fight against HIV.
I have seen too many women that has been stigmatized and has been killed and beaten up just because of basically what they have. Like, makes me mad to the point that, that can happen to me one day.
It's important because people have the right to live, and no one should be abused because of their status. And I just think that people should respect us as women living with HIV.
I get very emotional, not just about the importance of the Day of Action to End Violence, but because I am a Black woman living in the United States, living with HIV 28 years. I've gone through so many different things, and as women, we have been silenced, and it's not fair. We should be able to speak up and speak out loud about what's going on with us and with our bodies.
As someone living with HIV, the fact that we are criminalized or that those laws exist, I feel like they put me or other women living with HIV at greater harm when it comes to being able to navigate like dating, relationships, sex. It makes those things scary, you know? Well, for me at least. And so that's why I think it's important.
I think it's important because it gives us a chance to tell our story, to tell our truth, to let our voice be heard, or let others know how we are really feeling in society now and what's going on within us that no one can truly see other than when we say it out loud.
Violence that wasn't always physical, but sometimes emotional and spiritual, still traumatic nonetheless, has been inflicted upon me as a Black woman who identifies as trans and has been living with HIV for 20 years. I have had to deal with negativity and hostility simply because I feel that our government has not done their due diligence in changing the laws that surround protecting people and their right to bodily autonomy. A movement that creates an action stance to come against the violence that is being absorbed by Black women, queer women, trans women, is definitely a necessity, because if we don't stand for something, we'll fall for anything.
I feel this could possibly help those who are currently going through IPV and those who have not yet, so that they recognize it and stop it or get out of it before something terrible or deadly could happen to them.
I've seen how difficult it is, especially in my culture, for us to come out and talk about violence. For example, it is a taboo for us to talk about intimate partner violence. Even when you go to report to the police, for example, or to any authority, the community ostracize you. And so for that reason, African immigrant women living with HIV, they end up enduring the violence, they suffer, and most of them have ended up suffering from mental health, discouragement, and sometimes health issues, including bodily harm.
I just feel like people living with HIV should feel safe. They shouldn't feel like because they disclose their status that they would be harmed in any way. But unfortunately it happens. So this day is very important to me so that we can try and the spotlight on what's going on. So that way we can hopefully put a stop to it.
This is a bit challenging. I do lots of talks, and this one in particular, it's a very much a hard topic to talk about when you've been impacted as a woman with violence living with HIV and it's all its different forms.
I was raped.
I had to protect myself from being choked in my sleep.
He sodomized me and left me in my floor for dead. And he said, I told you I would kill you. And he runs out the door.
And he once tried to throw me backwards down a flight of stairs, which probably could have killed me, but I fought him back and we both rolled down the stairs.
I was beat, raped, and held hostage in my home in 2014. And that's how I became diagnosed.
And I woke up to someone who was doing things to me that I didn't consent to.
So I was in a compromising situation with a guy that I met, and he raped me. After he finished, he asked me what my status was, and I told him, and he used it to blackmail me for days. He tortured me mentally and emotionally. I suffered a lot emotionally from that.
The neighbors called the cops. They wound up having to take my kids. I had to go through the process of fingerprinting and being searched. I felt violated during that process.
And that traumatized me and it has always stayed with me. It's not the first time living with HIV that I've been raped or have been sexually assaulted. Recently, as I was walking down the street where I live, I found myself having a man come up very quickly behind me, trying to gain my attention, and then he assaulted me. Immediately, because of having attended HINAC, which is HIV is Not a Crime National Training Academy, I knew that living with HIV and being a trans woman, that I would be easily misidentified as a sex worker. But in that moment of being assaulted, I went to hit him to let me go. And I realized that living with HIV, that if I were to do him physical damage, that I would find myself having to talk to the police and it could easily, the tables could turn. The police could look at my medical records and find that I live with HIV, charge me with solicitation, possibly, and I would have an enhanced sentencing onto a situation that I didn't create, that I didn't want, nor did I encourage. I did nothing except walk down the street.
They say when you know better, you do better. So when I became older and received advice from older women, other people, and even attended a few trainings that some organizations and agencies had that educated me on domestic violence and IPV, I learned to recognize that physical violence, domestic violence, and IPV is dysfunctional and wrong. I adjusted my life to no longer accept or go through these types of relationships. I now thrive on independence, recognizing red flags in relationships and setting expectations and or standards ahead of time and not allowing men to think they can harm, threaten, mentally, emotionally, or physically abuse me. Because I think it's important that women recognize that emotional, mental, psychological, and or verbal or financial abuse often are precursors to physical violence and IPV.
It took me a while to get through a place of healing, but through writing and therapy, self-therapizing myself through my art, my creativity, my writing, I was able to purge those emotions from me. That's why I feel it's important that we be diligent, and vigilant in speaking out against these atrocities.
When I came to notice it, when they would tell me that I had HIV, okay, my own self, I wanted to hurt myself, okay? I went through a lot, okay? Even with my family, I went through a lot. I thought I was going to get pushed to the side, okay? And this was all my thoughts, because I found out when I was in prison. My mother understands, okay? But it's still time that I struggle with her with this, okay? Understand? I don't care if she go out there and tell anybody who I see or I talk to, first thing she tell them, oh, she's living with this, she's living with that. I really don't care. You know what I mean? Okay. I know what I'm living with. Okay. Understand? I know 100% what I'm living with.
It made me even more not want to disclose because I don't want to be treated that way. I don't want people not wanting to touch me or eat in the same place that I'm eating in because people don't have the correct information.
I felt like I looked like my diagnosis. I felt like I smelt like my diagnosis. I'm thankful for the women before me that helped me up and, seeing something in me when I couldn't see nothing in myself.
But I have been in relationships where I felt emotionally and mentally abused because of being HIV positive woman. and they were not HIV positive. And so I felt like they would often emotionally, verbally, or mentally abuse me and treat me as though I was less than, and that they were pitying me or doing me a favor because I was an HIV positive woman.
They had me thinking that nobody else wanted me but them, and they didn't really want me, but I should be glad. And it wasn't just one partner, it was all of them until I got empowered from other women living with HIV.
Because I have experienced incidents where I've been stigmatized, I guess, and rejected because of my status, or even where I've been in situations where like I've been threatened to be like reported to, you know, for the HIV criminalization laws, or where folks have gotten mad at me or I've been in fights because of it. But like I've been in emotionally abusive relationships where I was with someone who made me feel like they accepted me because of my status, and that like I wasn't going to find anyone else that was going to accept that. You know, I was in situations where I accepted less than I deserved because of that. I felt like I was this like infectious thing instead of like sexy or desirable.
I wanted to go ahead and I wanted to share with this person who I felt I had feelings for, who I felt had feelings for me, about my status. And when I told him, he became angry. He belittled me in some ways. He threatened to come to my house. He threatened to beat me up. And I thought it was actually going to get violent at one point in time.
I was discriminated against. I was talked about. My son was put out of his daycare because of my HIV status. They found out about it, and so they said he had to leave.
A few years back, I found myself houseless, and I was blessed with a HOPWA voucher. And I was really happy to get that voucher and finally get my own housing after being a year and a half on the streets. Or the landlord asked me what is this voucher? And I explained to him that the voucher was just kind of like Section 8 voucher, but it was different. It's called a HOPWA voucher. And he said, HOPWA, what does that stand for? And when I said HOPWA stands for Housing Opportunities for People Living with AIDS. And the look on his face and the step backwards took me back to a moment also in the same town when I went to the doctor. And when I walked in, same thing, I mentioned to the doctor that I was living with HIV, and he took 2 steps backwards. So that brought me right back to that point of feeling inadequate and feeling like there was something wrong with me and so on and so forth. You know, the landlord was all for renting to me until I said that the voucher was for people living with AIDS. Stigma is violence, and stigma hurts.
I had applied for a job, and I, at that time, was pretty open about my status on some of my social media. They pretty much indicated that I was a shoo-in for the job. And I went through the interview process and then definitely looked up my social media and found out that I was a person living with HIV, and I did not end up getting the formal job offer. So it's pretty clear that they had found out that I was a woman living with HIV and no longer wanted me to be part of their organization.
Racism is an issue, of course, here. But when it intersects with immigration status, it even show up in an ugly form, especially when you are seeking services, when you're seeking health services or any social services. And it is not once or twice because of my immigration status that I've had someone say something negative about me coming here in this country. How would it affect you and your immigration status? How can it lead to even deportation when someone is talking about that? And I've seen many women, not myself, who have refused to access services because of fear of deportation. And to me, that is violence because it affects my health.
I've been diagnosed with a disease that they feel somehow demotes me or diminishes me as a human being looked at often as a number or a statistic or a person who was careless and somehow deserves to be treated, like a lab rat or a guinea pig. And so for me, it's the systemic violence, that I think we often face as, women who are living with HIV, in a patriarchal society, because I'm sure that men may experience this as well, but there's that added layer of misogyny and sexism and transphobia that goes into how healthcare providers and how pharmaceutical conglomerates engage with us as human beings.
They told my sister my diagnosis when I didn't even know my diagnosis as of yet. The medical setting discrimination, when they start to ask you questions outside your need. Like they asked me a question such as, how did you contact HIV? And I said, um, that's not, I felt offended. You should look at what the case manager sent you. I'm undetectable. I've been taking my medication for some time now, and I'm not a threat to you dinner wise. How I contacted it should be um, a issue of how I should get my care. The front desk, they was just giggling and laughing, and they wasn't, you know, really doing their jobs. And when I approached the issue or said something, that institution thought I was very vocal. They made it the same thing as if I was a problem patient. They started to ignore my wants and my needs, and I had to take it a little further over their heads and spoke to somebody as one of the board of directors, and they thought I was overstepping my boundaries. And ever since then, everybody was on P's and Q's about when I come in the room. Oh, watch out for her. She's a problem patient. No, I'm not a problem patient. I was a patient that was patiently waiting to be seen by a doctor. If you are speaking up about your needs, I don't think speaking up about your needs should be a problem patient.
I've had one episode with a doctor, a dermatologist. When I first got clean, I had this rash all over me from an allergic reaction. And this guy, when he wouldn't even touch me. He wouldn't even touch me. He was like 3 feet away. It was like, oh, that looks like, yeah. And I'm like, how do you even know? You haven't touched me. You haven't even got close enough to see what it is. And, and it made me feel really bad because that's awful. Go to your providers, for help. And he shunned me.
I experienced traumatic violence, stigma to the millionth degree when I was told that I would never have any more children. And I gave birth to a baby boy in 2014 at March 19th of 2014. And my son's life was taken because of my HIV status. And that still devastated to me today, because the hospital found it now robbery to take my son away from me. And not only did they take my son away from me, they took away my tools, my ability to be able to ever have children again. So they cut, double tied, and burned my tubes to make sure I would never give birth again. And I think that's just so unfair. And that's another reason I fight.
When I became pregnant for my youngest child, and the OBGYN doctor was very, very clear with me that I had no business having children. And I think she was looking at me through the eyes of as a Black woman, as an immigrant woman, as someone at that time who was on Medicaid. And, she continued to offer to tie my tubes all the way up to the birth of my child. And for me, that has been sort of the most profound experience that for a while, especially as this was before I had gotten into advocacy, really traumatized me. And now that I know better, now that I know how we are to advocate, especially as it relates to that kind of stigma in the medical world, I have wished I could go back to that moment. I have sometimes even dreamt of going back to that doctor and speaking with her. But I have felt that it is better to turn that around and empower other women to know their rights.
So because of my status, I couldn't, when I gave birth to my last born, I was sterilized because of my status. And I didn't know by then that was a violation. That's violence against my body. Violence doesn't stop at that. And it doesn't matter whether you are an advocate, an activist at the national level, global level, regional level, we all experience violence in one form or another.
This last week in a medical situation in a dental office, I found myself having to navigate my pronouns. They were being updated and I wasn't being asked. In supervisory charge, who was very well versed in DEI. She would have received lots of training. In the middle of having instruments in my mouth, I got misgendered. Imagine that. That's violence to me. I have no ability to talk. I can't respond.
Misgendering is basically calling someone by the wrong gender. Me being a woman of trans experience, I go by she, her, hers, anything of a feminine pronoun. Them misgendering me will be them calling me him, he, his, man, guy, dude, stuff like that. Number one, it can lead to violence in many ways. What if you're in a setting where no one knows you and all of a sudden this one person decides to, oh, that's a guy, that's a dude. What's that going to do? It's going to draw unwanted attention and it's going to make things a hostile situation for the person involved. Most people have their preconceived notions of what trans women are and what they're not. And when you don't agree with what a trans woman is, anything after that can be pretty much violent. But you can belittle someone to the point where they feel like they don't need to be here anymore, or they can't deal with it anymore, so they unalive themselves. As far as trans women living with HIV, that's even worse. It's even worse because they not only do they think you are less than because you're trans, but now you're a damaged one at that. You're diseased at that point.
To connect, like I am taking this chance now to connect with other people living with HIV, get with other groups like PWN that can help you, because this group is helping me to understand that I'm not a walking disease. I'm a person living with HIV.
I have a team now. I'm not by myself anymore. Stay grounded in your truth. Always get the help that you need. That mentally, it can cause mental strain on your mental health. Get the therapy that you need.
Self-love is one of the toughest things I've had to learn for myself. Self-love is so important for us to be able to get up every day and get on with things.
Just because you're living with HIV doesn't mean that you're not nobody. You is a very important person. Ignorance is everywhere. Okay? And there's a lot of that around. Okay? But you one intelligent person that you could stop that ignorance they have against you. Keep your head up, look front, don't look back, don't look sideways, don't look down, look straight. with your head up and be proud of yourself.
To say, don't give up hope. Get help. Don't be scared to help yourself. Don't be scared to get out of the situation that you're in. I tell you, it's wonderful on the other side of violence.
Don't be discouraged. Just do everything that the doctors tell you and be safe.
It is not your fault. You do not deserve any of this. The stigma, the doctors tripping, and you don't deserve none of that. And your partner tripping, none of it. Your family. It's not your fault. You did not ask to become HIV positive.
You are the one that's taking care of yourself. You have to be the one to advocate for yourself. Speak up and don't let anybody shut you down.
Whether you can share on camera and scream it from a rooftop, or whether it's a small video clip where you don't want to be identified, I think, sharing your story is really powerful in any of those ways and anything in between.
The power is in you to use your voice if you so choose to. When you are ready, your voice will know what to do.
Your feelings are valid. Continue to be inspired, continue to be motivated, continue to fight for your sovereignty, your humanity, your bodily autonomy.
We are people who are living and surviving with HIV. We are wonderful, loving, and caring people who are no different than anyone else.
If I could take anything with me, I would take the strength of my peers and my community members.
We know that we're out here as a community, waiting to support you, to meet you where you're at, and then walk with you the rest of your journey.
Love on yourself. Love your sisters. Love your brothers. Love everyone in this fight with you. And keep on living, keep on pushing, keep on loving, keep on striving, keep on fighting, and keep on keeping hope alive. Because love covers all things. And love allows us to be free.
Lived it alone, lived it in pain, lived it in depression, lived it in hurt, lived it in fear, lived it and learned, lived it and came out of it, lived it and conquered it, lived it and defeated it, lived it and looked victorious in it. I lived it. I'm HIV positive.